All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here will be looking at the Miami Hurricanes and if they can rise up to be a national championship contender in 2024. Last year, this was a team I was very high on. I picked them to make an appearance in the conference championship game, sprinkled some cash on them to hit their over win total, and they came up one win shy. And that all started with them being 4-0, Nick. They lose to Georgia Tech after Mario Cristobal decides not to take a knee. And that ended up being the difference maker, not just for my bet, but also for what kind of seemed to be a downward spiral for the rest of the season. End up losing to North Carolina the next week. Plenty of close games, pretty much the rest of the season in terms of games won, and then a couple of brutal losses as well. Close ones to Louisville and FSU, where the defense played incredibly tough, even against NC State. Biggest issue, though, was this offense just kind of fell off a cliff. Tyler Van Dyke, end of the year of 12 interceptions. He had a monster game in week 2 against A&M, almost 400 yards, 5 scores. This is a guy who, again, Nick, was just abysmal after that. He had interceptions in 5 straight games. 11 of his 12 came over that stretch. He didn't play in the game against Clemson. That ended up being an 8-point victory for the Hurricanes. Early on in the season, it looked like they were primed to do business. That was a great defense they tore up against A&M, Nick. They had a couple of cakewalks after that, but they ended up losing to an opponent in the Yellow Jackets they shouldn't have, and that really just set the tone for the rest of the year.
That loss against Georgia Tech continues to be an inexcusable loss. Mario Cristobal has a history of this. It doesn't make any sense to me. We saw this happen. I believe the game was against Stanford a couple years ago at Oregon where they had a similar issue happen. I don't really understand his whole philosophy by not kneeling. It doesn't make any sense to me, and it certainly is a questionable coaching decision. Among a few other questionable coaching decisions I saw this past season at Miami, this offense was flat out abysmal in the second half of the season. Tyler Van Dyke was an absolute disaster for this team, which is crazy considering the heights he made. It's hard to find another player in college football that had a high point in the season and a lower low point in the season than he did. It was just an all over the place, complete 180 for him, and absolute crazy when you look at it. When push comes to shove, I thought this defense was fantastic. We're going to talk about the defense obviously a little bit later in this episode, but I thought the defense last year was really good for this team. I thought Cristobal is continuing to coach a solid team in the trenches as well. I was not as high on Miami as you were last year. I could certainly understand the argument that you were making and others in the college football media world were making. I still have, my doubts about this team and some of the other aspects of this team. We're going to get into some of my doubts throughout this episode, but this is a team that is very talented. And this offense now, they bring in some nice weapons from the portal, add in a great signal caller here. We'll talk about in a second. So there is certainly room to grow with this Hurricanes team.
Yeah, you certainly wonder where they would have been if they had more stability at the quarterback position. Offense still improved a good bit from 23 points to 31 points per game. And that stability at the quarterback position is what they're hoping to get in Cam Ward. He decided to enter the draft but not hire an agent. Everyone kind of figured it was just him trying to pluck more NIL money, and it worked. The Hurricanes ended up getting him soon after that. This is a player with great natural arm talent, has a nice quick release. He's a good ball handler, pretty good, creative thrower, can throw on the run, 6'2", 220, has some good size. He's a clutch player. He likes to rise up in big moments, needs to anchor down his fundamentals a little bit. This is a guy who's been productive for the Cougars. The first month of the season for him was phenomenal. He was, rising up the Heisman, podium real fast, and obviously things quickly fell apart for him as well and for the Cougars. And that was mainly having just an incredibly poor offensive line. Now you're going to surround him with a better, system, better offense of line, some more weapons as well. And I think this might be the guy who can bring them some stability. And start with Xavier Restapro at wide receiver, one of the best in the country. He's a great slot playmaker. I think he has some very strong hands, overall an elite player. I think this guy's going to be absolutely fun to watch this upcoming season. Him and Jacoby George, the top 2 wide receivers, are back. George had 3 of his 8 touchdowns versus Texas A&M. Good downfield playmaker with speed, nice yards after catch ability. He had, Cam Ward had a nice little duo of his own at Washington State. And that's what he's getting here with Miami, Nick. I think this is certainly going to be a wonderful pairing. Last year, Josh Kelly, Lincoln Victor, they were very productive for Washington State. They're not going to spread it out as much in Shannon Dawson's system, but this is certainly going to be better for him with better protection and overall an elevated group of playmakers.
This is a great, talented room that he has in office. Xavier Restapro is such a fun wide receiver to watch. Nearly 1,100 yards receiving last year, 12.8 yards per grab, 6 touchdowns. His ceiling is incredibly high. High expectations for him this year. I think he has a lot of success. The skill positions are certainly loaded on this team. Jacoby George, another good returner, 864 for him. 15.2 yards per grab and 8 scores for him. So good numbers across the board. The running back room has some talented players as well, which is certainly important. Henry Parrish Jr., I like him a lot. 6 touchdowns on the ground, 625 for him. Mark Fletcher Jr., 514 and 5 scores for him as well. So certainly some nice production returning there. I think, bringing in Cam Ward, I knew that the NFL thing, it seemed like it was going to be, a way to get more NIL money, which we thought happened, and that's what happened here. He ends up in Miami. I think the fit makes a lot of sense as a quarterback who was fantastic. And Incarnate Ward, I really thought that when he went to Washington State, I was surprised that they got a player of his talent. We saw him really have some successful moments. Obviously, there were some issues as well, but he was under pressure pretty much the entire time he was there. The offensive line played him no favors. He steps into a better situation with a better offensive line that could really help him out.
Yeah, they gave him like 10 sacks or something. The UCLA got absolutely, demolished. Isaiah Horton, a guy who had 9 of his 13 grabs come over the span of only 2 games. He has some speed to his game. Ray Joseph, a nice twitched speedster. He can win underneath and take it far. He's a slot guy who can also pluck the ball out of the air. Robbie Washington, they consider him a bit of a Swiss Army knife-like player with some great speed. Overall, I like this wide receiver room. Some guys I just mentioned, they're going to have to prove it, though. Parrish, like you said, a good slashing runner. I'd like to see some more production out of him this upcoming season, though. Fletcher, as a freshman, a hard-nosed, physical guy, really impressed. And then A.J. Allen, he put up some respectable numbers of his own in 9 games. 361 yards and 5 touchdowns and only 70 touches. This is a pretty deep, group of supporting cast weapons here, Nick. And, I certainly want to shift, to the offensive line, because I think this is where you're really going to expect Miami to shine under Mario Cristobal. And I think this might be the group that's going to be the best so far under his tenure. 3 crucial pieces are back, Jalen Rivers, 6'5", 325. He was a consistent performer left tackle, played 30 snaps in 2020 at the 2 tackle spots. After that, though, he played plenty of time at guard. He just kicked outside for this past season. He impressed a good bit, so I really expect him to take that next step at left tackle. Dennis Cooper was very impressive as a pass blocker from his right guard spot, 6'6", 350. It's a big physical player they certainly like there. And, of course, X5 star in Muwaga, a true freshman who had his struggles, but another key piece that should, also ascend, 6'6", 315. He's certainly going to continue to bulk up. You've seen plenty of, true freshman players at the tackle spot struggle. Francis, though, no exception there, but he's still impressed at moments. And I think, with so much youth, it's not a big shock that he did struggle, but I think moving forward, this is a guy that they think can compete for All-American honors.
This is a great offensive line, in my opinion. Francis Muwaga is a fantastic player at right tackle. Yes, had struggles. True freshman jumping in the gauntlet there in the ACC is obviously going to be difficult, but I think the ceiling with him is still very high. We saw a lot of flashes of solid pass protection and good run blocking as well. He's a very talented player at right tackle. Aneez Cooper as well right there on the right side at right guard. I think it's a really good right side. They're 2 strong players there that are only going to get better throughout time. Jalen Rivers, a kick out to left tackle, really worked for him. He's really found his stride there. I think he's really good on that blind side. A really solid player there. A great blocker, top to bottom, solid and pass block. I really like what he can do with his footwork as well. This is a unit that I think is very physically strong, a solid unit top to bottom. Cristobal wanted to get this offensive line to look good, and obviously bringing a guy like Fluaga in obviously makes it clear that they are attacking the trenches early on, getting a 5-star in there. This makes a lot of sense for me to continue working on the trenches and building up this offensive line that is a really respectable unit to start.
Yeah, Rivers and Malagoa, these 2 should probably potentially be bookend tackles for them. We'll take a deeper dive in the fall for the O-line. Samson Unkanloa, he was also a 5-star. We'll see where he is slotted in this year. Tommy Kinsler is likely to slot into left guard. Javion Cohen last year wasn't all that great for them. Kinsler, 6'6", 340. He was a nice player from last year's class. Replacing Matt Lee at center is going to be the biggest question mark overall, though. Ryan Rodriguez, it looks like he's going to be put in that center. He was an impressive one blocker for them in some of his limited snaps. 6'2", 275. We'll see what he gets bulked up to when we see the full season roster. Overall, again, this is an offensive line. They didn't allow many sacks. They got better in the power run game. Still looking for them to ascend to that dominance level on the ground. I think they can certainly approach 200 yards per game. And if they want to do that, it's going to be up to this offensive line to really take that next step, Nick. I think this right here might be the best group he's had in all 3 years there. I think they're very happy with their depth. Some of the guys, like we alluded to at the tackle positions, that are only going to get better with limited experience so far under their belt. Very excited for this part of the offensive line for Cristobal and company. How do you see this working out overall?
I think this is a good group that has a lot of room to improve, but is still very talented. I think the ceiling has not been met yet. I like what I see with this group. Like I said, physically strong, good in the trenches. I think it's a key thing to do is dominate the trenches, bring in talented players top to bottom. They're bringing in 5 stars, high-end 4 stars, plugging them in and giving them great experience. This is a very strong unit in the ACC.
We'll see what Alex Murbaugh can do with that unit. I think Miami, they improved a solid bit in the red zone as well. Went from 81% scoring percentage to 84%. A couple more touchdowns, and an extra field goal there. So those certainly help in adding on to your points, most certainly. That's another part of their game that needs to continue to rise. I think that if they can continue to improve in the red zone, it could pay massive dividends. Obviously, when you have a quarterback who's turning the ball over like Van Dyke did last year, that's certainly a separate topic, right? But if you can limit the turnovers, which is expected to happen, you can booster this run game that's going to certainly help you in between the red zone. I think Miami's offense can be incredibly lethal, Nick.
I think this offense can be incredibly lethal. They're really solid in the red zone. If they continue to improve that and get that better, it's possible. They leave points on the board. That was an issue, settling for field goals. If they can go in there and get those touchdowns and get more points on the board, this could be a very strong unit. This defense is fantastic on the backside. The offensive line, I like it a lot. I think the skill players are fantastic, Restrepo especially. And now you bring in a really talented quarterback who still has a lot of great games left in him. This could be a really talented offense.
Cam Ward did have about a 5.5 yards per attempt mark at Washington State. Obviously, that's the nature of that system, right? We certainly want to see how he'll adjust to having to air the ball out a little bit more, where, quick decisions aren't always going to be a premium here. Looking at Lance Guidry's defense, this is a unit that I thought would be one of the nation's best last season. The defensive line figured to be amongst that elite grouping, and it certainly played to the standard for the most part. Could have had maybe more dominant production. But, Georgia, for example, they don't even load up the stat sheet, and they showcase good rotation, that being the Canes. A player we didn't even mention once last preseason, Ruben Bain, he was a four-star true freshman, was one of the nation's best pass rushers. He made an impact often. He was a really impactful player for them. He's only going to get better. Najee Kelly and Akeem Mesidor, these guys were good players. They battled injuries last year, barely saw the field. Mesidor has improved as a run stopper, and he's always been an adequate pass rusher. Elijah Alston reunites with his former DC Guidry from the Marshall days. He was one of the top-ranked defenders in college football this past season, 11.5 TFL. He was great for them off the edge. They get back Thomas Gore at his defensive tackle spot. He does a good job clogging in the middle, even though he's a bit of an undersized defensive lineman. I'd like to see him get on the field a little bit more, but he's been a good run defender for them. Jared Harrison-Hunt, he was solid, and he'll be a part of this rotation. He played plenty of snaps. They picked up two nice players in Marley Cook and C.J. Clark. Cook, he's been a nice, sturdy 300-pound defensive tackle for Middle Tennessee State. He's been good versus the run. Clark, he's been about an average run stopper. He's been an incredibly poor tackler, misses a lot in the hole, but he's another 300-pound player that, should, offer some experience and nice rotational help. And a Joshua Horton, a young player who should eclipse 300 pounds. They have much more depth on this interior defensive line. They had, pretty limited depth last season. They had injuries, and they still played well, Nick. They were holding opponents to 105 yards per game on the ground. They never really seemed to get gashed here other than the UNC game. Rutgers kind of had their numbers, but, we don't really consider the postseason. Louisville, they were able to really spark some nice runs and help them win what was a close game. But other than that, this run defense was dynamic. It was phenomenal, even with some of the issues with health and depth, Nick. They were great, and I think they can certainly approach those elite levels this upcoming season.
The depth was really tested last year. Akeem Mesidor only played in 3 games. Injuries really tore this team up. They had to get a lot of different rotational pieces in there, and there are some solid pieces returning. Ruben Bain Jr., I like him a lot. The 44 total tackles, 12.5 tackles for loss, 7.5 sacks. Good numbers there. 3 forced fumbles, too. He's a really big physical player. Jared Harrison-Hunt as well. 26 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss, 2 sacks for him. Thomas Gore, 8 tackles in limited appearances, but 4 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, so nice production in his limited snaps. He's going to look to step up there and be really involved at defensive tackle. Thomas Gore at nose tackle has some nice potential as well. They made some moves, added some pieces. This is a unit that's very solid, and despite the injuries, only allowed 105 yards per game on the ground is an impressive number. I'd like to see the sack figure certainly get up this year. I want to see a little bit more. We have to try and find some way to get a little more production out of that. Obviously, returning Bain with 7.5 sacks is solid, but I like to see some more production out of this defensive line, get in the backfield and cause some problems.
Yeah, outside of Bain and Francisco Muago, sack numbers were not very good from the rest of this football team. You look at Muago, his brother obviously is phenomenal for them up front, but this is a transfer linebacker who from Washington State arrives, and he paid massive dividends for them. He was a phenomenal blitzer. 82 stops, 18 TFL, 7.5 sacks. Had 2 forced fumbles. This guy was just phenomenal for them. They were very happy to get Francisco back here. And you certainly wonder, Corey Flagg departs. Can he spark the rest of this linebacking group? Wesley Basanti, he was, solid, 5th on the team in tackles. KJ Cloyd, he's another guy that you're going to look at to hopefully try and get a spark out of. Raul Ogori, Chase Smith, some guys who typically haven't very gotten on the field often. You don't wonder what's going to happen. Cloyd, rather, sorry, has departed. So that's one less guy you have to, that's going to be able to be available. If they didn't get Francisco back, I think this linebacking group would be in a world of hurt, Nick. And obviously, again, we'll take a deeper dive in a couple of months. But overall, right now, they have one elite playmaker. Everyone else is trying to catch up. I think Basante will probably be that one guy to rise. But you really want to see a spark from the rest of this group, especially if the defensive line is not able to really improve that sack number to a tune of our liking.
Francisco Moaga obviously is a really talented player, led the team in tackles, 82 total tackles, 18 tackles for loss, 7.5 sacks, tied with Bain Jr., for the lead for the team. He's a really great leader. We talked about him, super talented, 3 pass breakups too. Wesley Basante, he has to step up, 44 total tackles, 6.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks. He has a big opportunity to step up here, but outside of that, the depth is just very limited down there at linebacker, right? There's some certainly issues there. Chase Smith is a senior that's played in a few games here and there, not a whole lot of experience for him, but just kind of a veteran locker room presence. You want to see if he can get involved and be a good producer for this team rotational wise. Those two together there, I think that's a good starting block, but I do worry about this defense, and especially in the middle part of this defense. I think this linebacking core is a weak, leaves a little bit to desired here. I wish they would have gone out and got some solid players in the portal, or worked on the recruiting of this. That's a position group I'm certainly worried about.
Yeah, Malagoa is certainly going to be big dividends for them. Looking at the secondary, they had plenty of big plays last year. They did have 9 interceptions from its defensive backs. That was only 3 guys, and all of them depart. Kitchens, Williams, and Corey Couch. They never once allowed more than 65% completion rating in a game. Allowed 6 games of 250-plus yards. A few of those skewed. They're blowing out Temple. Texas A&M was playing from behind. Darrell Porter, he had a big resurgent season in coverage last year. Was a very sound tackler. Only missed 1 tackle all season long. I know he's going to be an impact playmaker for them out wide. Jadaeus Richard, the Vanderbilt transfer, he didn't quite make the impact we were expecting, but he didn't have to. They didn't really have a reason to force him on the field. He's now going to crack the lineup, though. Demaria Brown, he struggled a good bit. They might put him in the slot. The aforementioned Couch, he was really good for them in the slot. The biggest question mark, though, here is safety. They're losing 2 high-end NFL draft prospects in Cameron Kitchens and James Williams. They went to the portal for help, though. Isaiah Taylor didn't play a whole lot last year for Arizona. He has some experience in a 4-2-5 scheme, though. Savion Riley, he had 48 tackles in 8 games for Vanderbilt last year. No plays on the ball, though. No picks, no pass breakups. Played nearly 350 snaps, so that isn't great news, but he was an effective tackler, right? And that's a good starting point. Michelle Powell, he's been also really good in a 4-2-5 for the Washington Huskies. Hasn't exactly been stout in other categories, but he does do it well, in holding up in coverage. That's also another nice starting point. So they have some versatility, it seems, here. Markeith Williams, he was a former 4-star, enters his 3rd year. He was a ball hawk that they can hope, fill in Kitchen's role. The secondary is far from dominance, but I think they are a well-equipped unit. They're certainly going to take a step back unless they can get some similar playmaking from their safeties. And if Williams can come out there and pluck the ball out of the air numerous times a game, Nick, that might just be one player that helps them get in the right direction. I do like them being assertive on the portal, though, going and getting 3 guys.
I think it is solid that they went out in the portal and grabbed guys to fill needs. They have a lot of holes to replace. That's a big thing that we certainly noticed with the secondary unit is there are some issues here. I think Misha Powell is a really good player to add from Washington. A good physical player, really solid player, top to bottom. Isaiah Taylor from Arizona is another player that has some big potential there. I think he's a player that has some good work. Savon Riley, no plays on the ball like you said, but a good tackler, and I think a guy that has some experience in the SEC at Vanderbilt. He could plug in potentially and be solid there. The returning production, it definitely lacks, and it does worry me certainly. The unit, the back end of this defense, I think the defensive line is fantastic. I do worry about the linebacking core in the secondary a little bit. I think they will drop off, but I don't think it will be a complete drastic drop off. I do expect some of these guys to step up.
Yeah, it shouldn't be to a substantial level. And I think Mario Cristobal is still getting this team in the right direction. 6th ranked recruiting class according to 24/7. A lot of high-end recruits they landed, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Last year, they picked up high-end guys on the offensive side. This is a team in a couple years, Nick, that's going to have immense amount of depth. Certainly with NIL and portal and all that, that should certainly only help benefit a program like this. Miami seems to be going in the right direction. Can they compete for a national championship this year? I don't rule it out. I certainly think that it's possible they can do that, especially with this expanded playoff. That makes life so much easier for teams like this, right? But the back half of the season was not great, even though the defense was playing well. They couldn't lean on the run game. The quarterback play was just worse than sporadic, right? It was just not very good. But they competed with teams. Obviously they lost to a really good Rutgers team in the bowl game. In November, they lost to a lot of ranked teams, all in close contests. Their defense clearly competed in. So this is not a bad football team by any means. And we'll go ahead and shift to the schedule before I get your opinion, Nick. This is a very easy schedule. They open the year at Florida. After that, I mean, I'm not really seeing much. They host Virginia Tech, going out to Cal. That's obviously going to be interesting. That's a long travel, one of the longest in the country you'll probably see. At Syracuse, maybe in the season finale. This schedule is fairly easy, Nick. 9.5 is the win total. We won't make predictions until late in the year. But do you rule national championship contention out for 2024?
I do rule it out as of right now. I'm cautiously optimistic with this team. Again, this is a team that I'm not as high on as some other people. I think there are some questionable issues with this team occasionally. I think this is a great team, right? Don't get me wrong, but I think that let's get to the baby steps first. Can they make the expanded playoff in the ACC? I'm not entirely sure how many bids the ACC will get in the expanded playoff. Do they get one of those bids? I think it's going to be certainly something you have to see. I do certainly like that they're playing Florida to kick off the season at Florida. That's a really solid scheduling. I know Florida's not going to be phenomenal this year, but an in-state opponent there, that's a great scheduling in my opinion. You play your rest of your out-of-conference USF. Nothing crazy there, although they gave Alabama a scare last year down there, so certainly keep that in mind. Florida A&M, Ball State, those are certainly easier games. Trip to Cal is tough on the road. I look at that 2-week stretch there in the end of October at Louisville, hosting Florida State. Those are two tough games right there. Very good teams. Florida State, we wonder what they're going to be like this year. I think Louisville have a lot of room to improve and are a very talented team that exceeded expectations last year. That's a very tough little stretch there. Plus, you get Duke on the back end of that on November 2nd. The rest of the schedule shouldn't be too difficult. Syracuse, end of the year, could be maybe a trap game on November 30th. This team could contend here. I think they could certainly push for an ACC title game appearance. I want to be a little more cautiously optimistic, though. I think, they'll probably get to 8-9 wins. It might be tough to hit 9.5 and get to that 10th win, though.
Yeah, I certainly think that, even with the secondary likely to step back, maybe the linebacking core struggling against heavier rushing attacks, I think the defense will play at an adequate level if the offense can, play up to par, and if they can showcase some nice balance. I think the ceiling is certainly pretty high for them, especially if they can get Cam Ward, to play, a nice level of progression that we've been expecting to see, and he can stay consistent, and the offensive line does what I anticipate. I certainly think this team can battle. I think I'll go ahead and rule it out as well, Nick. For now, I guess we'll see how they play. Let's just start off how they play in Gainesville, right? It's going to be a tough one there. I certainly think with guys like Restrepo, a deep running back room, this offensive line, that's the recipe for success, especially with this schedule. So Miami, a fun team to always talk about, Nick. Texas is back. Maybe Miami can be back next. We'll see what happens. I appreciate you joining me.
Yeah, looking forward to this season. I think that's a great way to kick off the season at Florida on that Saturday, most likely Saturday night. Gainesville, tough place to play. Crowd should be rocking. College football is better when the Hurricanes are good. I think Cristobal is slowly building something. He's getting the process done. I think this year's a little too early to consider national championship contending, but certainly next year that could be on the table.
Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.
I did not do well in this episode.